All right, chapter 26 is Asia in the era of imperialism. Asia plays such an interesting time, or such an interesting role in history during this time period between 1800 and 1914, building up to the First World War. Their situation in the world at large is just incredible because of their cultural precision, as far as they are some of the few countries in the world who hold on to a very tight cultural identity that few of us can fully understand. And then they are also, in many ways, they're kind of behind the times in that they, part of the way they hold on to their cultural individualism is that they don't allow a lot of outside influences. Well, some of those outside influences might be helpful to them. The Industrial Revolution, for instance, they are a good bit behind on a lot of that. But as you start the chapter, it talks about the Great Mutiny or the Great Revolt. The Great Revolt is the Indian term, and the Great Mutiny is the British term. And essentially, this is where we see sepoy troops who are Indian-born but British-trained troops who revolted against British rule. They'd had enough. They wanted their country back, because at this point India was under parliamentary rule where Queen Victoria is the empress of the country. But the Indians are by far the majority that are there. There's a number of socioeconomic effects during this time period as the Indians who are in their caste system, they are struggling with, well, here's my place in the world as this is what my religion and my culture dictates, and the British come in and kind of shake that up and really do take advantage of that quite a bit. It did not improve the lifestyle as well as conditions for those of the poor Indians, as they ate, drank, slept in, bathed in the same polluted rivers and sacred pools that are often going to contain cholera as well as other waterborne illnesses. During this time period, we see those that embrace the British lifestyle and the British rule, they are going to be improved, although never higher than those that are of British descent. The Indian Civil Service was a bureaucracy that required applicants to take entry exams. These were conducted in England, and the problem was that most Indians couldn't afford to make this trip, and so we see this as a problem for them to ever be active in government. Resentment continued to increase. We see the Indian National Congress organized to fight for, hopefully, the obtaining of Indian self-rule and independence. In the meantime, in the Dutch East Indies, you see the outbreak of the Java War. This is the Dutch were trying to impose their cultural system, which was exploitive of the people of this area. Peasants were planting a fifth of their land specifically for export, and this is such a poor country that often we see these people, we don't have enough land to be a part of this program. While education was encouraged, but that was only for the children of the rulers and the elite class. Well, so much of the people in this area are not a part of that, and so essentially we see mostly the Dutch are the ones that are highly educated. We also see in Southeast Asia the Naying dynasty, that's spelled with an NG at the beginning. That's the Naying. They gained power in Vietnam during the Peasant Rebellion. Their history is very sordid as they struggle with within themselves. We see it all kind of come to a culmination in our portion of the Vietnam War, but we see that we have French missionaries that are there. They're Catholic, and they're trying to convert the Vietnamese to Catholicism. They are executed, and that's going to open themselves up to a French invasion because they don't want their people killed. And we see the struggle between European influence and the Vietnamese culture. In the Philippines, they very much so are behind the times. They never really experience any great leap forwards in that They're always ruled by someone that's going to oppress them. You see the Spanish that ruled them for a long time. There's no centralized government. Most of the people are uneducated, and we also see that the islands being used as a stopover gap between Mexico and China. When war broke out between Spain and the United States, we moved into the Philippines as a kind of a stronghold against the Spanish with the promise that we don't want to colonize you, and yet that's exactly what we did. Next up on the list is China, as they struggle with pressure from outside forces. One of those problems comes to fruition with the Opium War. And this was an effort to open Chinese ports to international trade. And the resulting treaties opened up 5 ports to the British, who now controlled Hong Kong. And it also established extraterritoriality that exempted the British from Chinese law. Problem. During this, we also see on page 794, if you're trying to find me, concessions or large areas of Chinese treaty ports that were leased for perpetuity to foreign powers. We see this continue with a number of religious issues, as the religion of these people, they don't believe in anything called Jesus, and so this opens them up to kind of this need for the Europeans to go in and fix these people. They're barbarians, and we see what essentially turns into a rebellion of the Taiping Rebellion, one of the deadliest wars in world history. We also see a Boxer Rebellion, or the 1911 Rebellion. Both of these are on your test. The Boxers were a secret society that blamed foreigners for all of the Chinese problems. They came in, they tried to convert us to a religion that we don't understand or don't care about. They were very frustrated with that because they were told they were wrong. The Boxers were told, the Chinese were told they were wrong. The Boxer Rebellion ended in defeat. More Chinese decided they would study abroad to try and follow up on these military defeats. Why did we lose? What do we need to do better? And so as they learned more, in 1911, Army officers involved with rebel students staged a coup and toppled the Chinese monarchy, and this is called the 1911 Rebellion. The government is then replaced by a republic style of government that's kind of patterned off of Western ideas. Japan, as we move towards opening up Japan, we see this kind of era of gunboat diplomacy, and you're introduced by U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry, who entered into domestic negotiations with the Japanese emperor to try and open up trade. You also see the Meiji Restoration during this time period. You need to know that term as well. The Meiji reformers began to adopt Western-style modernization, where you see Japanese people being kind of influenced in the idea of who's influencing us. Is it really us, or is it somebody else? The Japanese were of the first non-Westerners to establish a government with a constitutional format. And so we see some changes there as well. They began a major interest in coal. They're outputting quite a bit of coal. They are becoming an export competitor for sure, as well as growth in their entrepreneurs. There's a Japanese government effort to encourage entrepreneurs to grow their business and grow their business ideas. And you see further efforts to grow industry, which is going to leave some frustration with those farmers and agricultural communities. They couldn't pay their taxes. They weren't making enough money, and so there's kind of this tension between the two. Next up on the list is you see the Russo-Japanese War come into play. The Japanese attacked Russia, won a foothold in China, and Russia was humiliated into defeat. We also see the movement of people. Westerners who entered Asia would often find that they needed to know the language, and that was difficult in many regards. Missionaries were the ones that made up the largest portion of foreigners in Asia. They had greater success in spreading their Western ideas than they had actually converting these people to Christian faith. We also see Indian entrepreneurs moving throughout Southeast Asia who would kind of taken indentured laborers. As many Westerners were fascinated with Asian culture, they would take in an indentured servant, pay them enough that they could eventually buy their freedom, but they just were fascinated by this culture, and that was part of it. And the next thing I want to hit on for this particular chapter are things that we label as Asian. When we talk about Asia, we are talking about a densely populated large portion of landmass, China, Korea, Japan, as well as others. These have long-standing ties to each other. India is less unified in that. They're not really a part of that, and some of that's played off of the influence of Islam, which would have kind of pulled them to some degree into more of a Middle Eastern type of culture. So they really are in a lot of ways their own beings. Do make sure to read this chapter, as this lecture is in no way comprehensive, just sort of hitting some high points. Do make sure you try to keep up with that. Best of luck, and let me know if you've got some questions. Have a good day.